Hello, welcome to the Firearms Training Central Podcast. This is Episode 1, the very first inaugural episode. So, welcome. Thank you for joining me. This is Isaac Chase, the owner and founder of Firearms Training Central. And I'm pretty excited about this podcast. And I have no idea where it's going to go in the long term. But in the short term, I've got some ideas. I've got some things I want to communicate. And I have some insights that I think are helpful to both instructors and students. And so this podcast should be a weekly show. We'll see about that. That's my goal. And I hope that you find something useful out of this podcast. For the first episode, I wanted to talk about something that we as instructors, and I say we because I am a part-time instructor, and I've been doing it for about 6 or 7 years. And something occurred to me over this summer that I had never thought of before, and I thought it might be helpful to bring it up for other instructors. So, first thing I got to do, though, is pull up my notes because I have lost them. All right, they're there. So, what I wanted to talk about today is for instructors. It's not for students. This podcast is going to be intended for instructors and students, but each episode will be intended for one or the other. So today, this one is for instructors. And I wanted to talk about the mind of the student. There's not a lot of times in my life where I have been brand new to something, a total beginner, in my adult life. I've done a lot of things in my life. I did a lot of things as a kid. I tried a lot of things, and I kind of figured out what I was good at and what I wasn't. But there wasn't a lot of times as an adult where I really started from scratch on something that was difficult. And I had that experience this summer, and I wanted to share it because it had a lesson for me as an instructor. I went whitewater rafting this summer up in Buena Vista, Colorado. And if you've never been up there, you should definitely get up there. I know people say that, but the Arkansas River is a beautiful river, and there is some great rafting out there on the river. We went late in the year, so the ride was a lot more technical than it was fast and crazy. But there's still some danger to it. And I would actually relate the water that day to maybe your first firearms training class if you've never taken one before. Yeah, there's an element of danger, but you're more nervous than anything else, and you're only really in trouble if you do something stupid. So the river was flowing pretty low. It was actually the second to last weekend that they were going to be open. But there were still some technical parts of the river that needed to be traversed correctly, and we had to listen to our boat guide, and we had to do the right thing. And I have only ever been rafting once in my life, and it was a long time ago, and I didn't remember anything about it except that the water could get very cold. So the instructor, our boat guide, he sounded and looked exactly like Ernest P. Worrell. If you ever watched the Ernest P. Worrell Saturday morning show or the movies Ernest Scared Stupid, Ernest Goes to Camp, Ernest Goes to Prison or Jail, whatever. This guy looked and sounded just like him. Very likable guy, very competent guy. You could tell that he'd been doing this for a long time. You could tell that he was definitely comfortable with the subject matter. He was an expert river guide and real wiry guy. Weighed about 130 pounds, 6 feet tall, and he was tanned. He'd been on the river all summer, like he is every summer. And the reason I'm talking about him is I'm building him up as a competent guide, a competent instructor, somebody who knows what they're doing, somebody who's done this a lot of times, who's instructed a lot of beginners a lot of times, and he knows what to expect from you, the beginner. And it's his job to keep you safe out there on the river. He's responsible for you. He's responsible for your safety. He's responsible for your fun. He's responsible for everything. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong out on the river. You can whack somebody with your paddle if you're not controlling your paddle. You could fall overboard. You could hit a rock and get yourself knocked out. You could drown. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. So it's his job to teach everybody and keep everybody safe. So he goes through the initial steps of showing us how to position our feet in the boat, how to hold the paddle, and most importantly, how to paddle. And, I paid attention. I watched him. He did it. He demonstrated the skill several times, and he talked his way through it. He broke it down into small tasks, but he's still talking kind of fast. And he showed us what to do. And there were 4 of us in the boat plus him. So 2 people on each side of the boat. So he says, "Are you ready?" We say we're ready, even though we're not ready. And we get in the boat and we start paddling. Initially, the water's very calm and very smooth. And I have my wife and my oldest child in the boat with us. And we have, actually, there was 5 of us, yeah. It was me and my wife and my oldest and and then 2 other people, a couple from, I think they were from Colombia. English speaking, but not their first language. And we start paddling, and I noticed that I'm not paddling correctly at all. And I don't exactly know what I'm doing wrong. I just know that I'm not paddling correctly. I'm not using my body correctly. I'm not positioning the paddle correctly. And I'm not paddling at the same time as the gentleman to my right. We're supposed to be paddling at the same time. If you've never been rafting before, what the guide does will tell you is they'll tell you how many strokes they want, in what direction they want, and which side of the boat they want it from, if they're not asking everybody to paddle the same. So if I'm in the front left of the boat and he says left 2, that means all the people on the left side of the boat are going to paddle twice. If he says give me 2, then everybody in the boat is going to paddle forward twice. If he says right forward 1, left back 1, that means the people on the right are going to paddle 1 stroke forward, and the people on the back or on the left side are going to paddle 1 stroke backwards. And it was the backward strokes that were really getting me. I was really messing that up. And, I'm not an idiot. I've done a lot of physical things in the past. I know how to pay attention and listen. And I was really struggling to get this stroke down correctly. And I was getting frustrated with myself because I don't normally have problems like this. But, getting older, my brain's not working like it used to. And so I was patient with myself, and I eventually figured it out. My oldest behind me told me, "You're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong." And, I paid attention and I listened and I fixed the problems. And then I was watching the instructor boat guide. He'd tell us, "Turn around, watch me, I'm doing it like this, watch me, I'm doing it like this." And I would try to just mimic each small part of what he was doing and put it together in a big picture. And eventually I got the hang of it. The guy to my right, he had the stroke down all right, but he had no sense of timing. And so I would say he was he was struggling with competence in a different area than I was. I had no problem with the timing. My problem was the stroke. So once I figured out the stroke, then I fixed the problem with the timing by just timing myself to him instead of waiting for him to time himself to me. And by the time we got to the more difficult parts of the river, we were really working together well as a team, and we didn't lose anybody. We didn't flip the boat. Somebody else in front of us lost somebody, so it's not like it wasn't possible. We did get stuck once, but it was a tricky section, and with low water, it was pretty much guaranteed we were going to get stuck. So we weren't really stressing about that. We got stuck. We got unstuck. We did what we had to do. But it was a lot to take in, and there was a couple of emergencies. One guy fell overboard on another boat, and we had to rescue him. And so we had to get our boat in position, and we had to rescue him, and I saved not his life, I saved his paddle. That was my job. I rescued his paddle. But there was a lot of things going on in the boat. there's not a lot of room in the boat. And when you pull a 250-pound dude into the boat, which this guy was a hefty boy, maybe not 250, but definitely 230, there's not a lot of room. We got to move around. We got to make room. We got to make sure we don't flip over. And we have to listen to the guide once we get the guy in the boat on where to paddle. And I kind of equate it to if you're on the range and you've been kind of learning some new stuff with your students or teaching them new stuff all day, and then you got to go to put it all together for a final drill, a final task. Maybe it's a scenario-based drill. Maybe it's a burn down where we're going to do, we're all going to shoot through all of our mags. Maybe it's going to be multiple targets with different stimuli to engage them, but it's kind of a test at the end of the class. And we all passed the test in the boat. We all basically did what we needed to do to stay safe and accomplish the task. and that was the first time in a long time that I'd really been a beginner student. And I thought about a lot of the students that I've taught, and I've thought about other students that I've watched other instructors teach. And sometimes you have students who just aren't getting it. And it could be something as simple as sight picture, sight alignment, or it could be something more complex, or it could be something very important and dangerous, like something involving safety. But there's definitely times out there where you're not getting through to your student and you're wondering what's wrong. Well, I'll tell you, when you're out there on the range and you are teaching, if there's a problem, it may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility. If your student's not listening or is not hearing you, is not picking up what you're saying, is not implementing what you're saying, it is your responsibility to fix it, because ultimately you're responsible for everything that happens out there on the range. And you need to think back, if you can, maybe right now, think back to the last time you were a total beginner at something and how difficult it can be to put together everything you're being taught into one action or one smooth sequence of actions, and to do it right and to do it safely. And then think about the pace of your class that you teach. Is the pace of your class too fast for the competency of your students, or even maybe just one student? Now, sometimes you have a student who is just way off the map. Sometimes you have a student who is not going to learn out there that day on the range. And you have to, make a decision at that point. Do I slow the rest of the class down to a level that's not fair to everybody else to help this one student, or do I find another solution? So let me take a drink real quick. I've been fighting that cold, so my my voice isn't what it usually is. So you have to make that distinction about what you're going to do about that, but you need to remember what's going on in that beginner's head. You need to remember what's going on in their head. They're trying to put together all of this stuff, and it might be too much for them at the moment. So maybe you need to schedule them for a private class, or maybe you need to ask them to sit down and you'll revisit them later. But you need to remember that not everybody picks this stuff up right away. And you kind of have to have your radar up for people who are struggling and why they might be struggling and what you need to do to fix that. And so I encourage you not only to think about the last time that you were a total beginner at something, but I would encourage you to maybe try something new that you've never done before. And it doesn't have to be a physical and dangerous activity, although I think it's helpful if it is. Maybe it's, depending on your age and your body ability, maybe it's rock climbing, maybe it's rafting, maybe it's taking a boxing class if you've never taken boxing, something that's somewhat difficult and that you've got no experience with at all. Because if you're teaching new gun owners, that's every gun owner. I mean, that's every student you've got there. Every student in a new beginner class has never really done this before. They've never really done what you're asking them to do. And it can be very overwhelming. And I think it's helpful for people to experience what it's like from their side before you try to teach them what you need to teach them. And I've seen some brand new gun owners pick things up very quickly. And it kind of makes you feel good as an instructor. Like, oh, yeah, I'm good. I can teach this person. They've never handled a gun before, and look how well they're doing. But more than likely, it's them that's good, not you. More than likely, if they're picking up things really, really fast, it's because their brain is wired that way. And good for you to be the instructor, good for you to be there and help them learn and teach them the right way to do things. But the fact that they're picking it up right away has as much to do with you as the student who can't understand anything that you're talking about. So have your radar up for those students. Have your radar up for those students who are struggling and why they might be struggling. I have found in my own experience that sometimes those students need the steps broken down a little bit more, and the pace of the class slowed down a little bit for them to understand what they're supposed to be learning. And so I would encourage you to go out and seek that out and see if you can find something to participate in. So real quick, I want to talk about this podcast. Since this is the first episode, I want to give a little preview of what we're going to be doing on this show. This show is not going to be recorded live. These are going to be taped shows, and they're going to be distributed hopefully on a schedule. My plan is to schedule these weekly, and I would like to do a lot of interviews. I'd like to do a lot of instructor interviews. And so I'm going to start local. I'm going to start with people around me. I'm located in Colorado. I have reasonable podcast studio accessibility. And I can also do things over Skype and telephone calls, record podcasts that way. So I'm going to be searching out instructors, and I'm also going to be searching out some students to talk about some of those issues that are happening from their side of the gun, so to speak. And I want to make this podcast a resource for instructors that are interested in picking up bits of knowledge along the way that maybe they wouldn't normally pick up in their everyday activities. So if I provide this as a podcast, you can listen to it on your way to work, on your way to the range. Hopefully you're a full-time instructor and you can be listening to this on the way to work as your job as an instructor. That would be awesome. Not a lot of instructors are full-time. Firearms Training Central's mission is to make instructors successful and make it easier for students to find instructors. So we would love to see all great instructors be full-time instructors. I'm going to say instructors one more time. So thank you for listening. And I think the format of these shows is generally going to be around 20 to 30 minutes, something easy to listen to, something quick, something helpful. And at times we may veer off of that format, but so I want to thank you for listening. And at this point, we don't have any sponsors, so you don't have to listen to any commercials, but go visit firearmstrainingcentral.com. If you're an instructor, we can help you connect with more students. And if you're a student, we can help you find some classes. So thank you very much for listening, and we will see you next time.